Hey, my name is Pearl. I am 15 years old. The story I want to tell you began long before I was born. This is a romantic story in its own peculiar way. A story that could touch the strings of my heart or bring sadness to me if I had just read about it in a book. Because a story that sounds touching and exciting can still ruin the lives of many people in reality. Well, I'll play with open cards from the very beginning. I will devote most of my story to my father. And this is not because I love him so much. A few months ago, he left me, my mom, my sister, and my brother. And I'm so mad at him. It all started when our family moved to a new home. Several generations of my dad's family had lived here before us in this old house. Of course, accumulating a vast amount of unnecessary things that my dad simply did not dare to throw away. And, of course, all these things were packed in various boxes, which, upon arrival, needed repacking, waiting to be sorted literally everywhere. And repacking them was my task. My brother Joseph, who is 1 year younger than me, was my helper. So, as you can guess, I worked basically alone. To find at least some pleasure in this boring and dusty work, I not only sorted and packed the old stuff, but I also tried to find something interesting there. Most of the time, there was nothing of interest in these boxes, but finally I found an old notebook in a hardcover. It was not signed and contained some jerky and incoherent handwritten notes. Of course, I decided that it was somebody's diary, and of course, I wanted to read it. Doesn't everybody do that? But sorting out these notes was an even more difficult task than sorting out the boxes. At some point, I realized that it was my dad's handwriting. This only made me even more curious. But not because I wanted to read my dad's diary. You see, when he was young, my dad dreamed of becoming a writer. Dad had always had this big thing about literature. He even named all of us, his children, in honor of Nobel Prize winners for literature. In general, looking at these notes, I decided that this was not a diary, but some outlines for a future or never-written book, and I curiously buried myself in these handwritten pages. The whole text was written from the main character's point of view, and that's why at first I thought it was a diary, and it was about a relationship with a girl named Frances. At first it was a completely prosperous and happy relationship of what seemed to be two high school students, but then everything collapsed due to a chain of coincidences. Frances's parents got divorced, and Frances's mother, who was a Canadian citizen, took her daughter back with her to her homeland. The main character of the story lived in the USA, and for some reason could not go after his beloved girlfriend. Then the text went on, regarding some close friends of Frances who for some reason didn't like the main character of the story. And I did not really understand what happened next. But I was wondering what happened at the end of this story. So I decided to take the notebook, approach my dad, and honestly, admitting that I had read his notes, ask him about what happened to the main character, to Frances, and to her friends. Dad was very surprised at what I'd found, and seemed a little embarrassed because I had read it. As he told me, it was neither a diary nor a collection of literary sketches, but something in between. Frances was a girl who existed in reality, and moreover, she was my dad's first love. But Dad was really just trying to express his feelings from a difficult breakup with his girlfriend on paper and make an essay about it. He asked me if this story was really interesting, and of course, I said that I liked it a lot. Then Dad fetched another one of the boxes from the storage room and pulled out a rewritable CD from in there. He said that the story was not finished on paper because later he bought a computer and tried to finish it with the help of this new technology. He even scanned several photographs of this Frances. I continued to read the story, and now it was much easier to read. I also looked at Frances's photographs. She was a pretty girl, but there was something about her that I didn't like. Maybe it was her smile. In general, it looked like something was wrong with her, like she was somehow unpleasant to me. And as for my dad's relationship with Frances, it was really destroyed by this new circle of friends she had made in Canada. Well, not exactly new. Her childhood friend, Nadine, lived in the city Frances had left for. Nadine, for some reason, disliked my dad and did her best to ruin their relationship in every possible way. She convinced Frances to choose a college in Canada and not in the USA so that she would not leave Canada. Nadine introduced Frances to her own circle of friends, a rather large and closed gang that left Frances with almost no time to communicate with my dad. And when he finally came to Canada, they showed him directly that he was unwelcome there. And Frances felt completely under the charm and influence of these people and did not even try to resist them. Dad noticed that his girlfriend was changing more and more, and not for the better. On his last trip to Canada, Nadine explicitly told my dad that Frances had already started a relationship with a guy from their circle, and that he had better leave her alone. Then my dad retreated, although he still loved Frances very much. Of course, I could not fully sympathize with my dad's story, because if he had stayed with this Frances, he would not have met my mother, would not have married her, and neither I nor my siblings would have been born. But still, the romantic story of his first love touched me. I thought that I wouldn't mind and even would probably love to watch a movie with the main characters resembling my young dad and Frances. Oh, if only I knew. I am 15 years old, and although I already consider myself pretty mature, of course, I can't really relate to the ups and downs of relationships between 40-year-old people. And of course, for a pretty long time, I did not even pay attention to the fact that Dad had begun to work much longer hours, or that he completely stopped spending the weekends with us, his family. Mom did not comment on what was happening, so I could only guess that something had gone wrong in their relationship. But after one incident, even if I were a blind person, I would have opened my eyes wider. It was his day off. I realized from the early morning that Dad was going somewhere. He put on a beautiful new shirt, expensive cufflinks, and used a cologne that he only used for meetings with important business partners. Mom sat in the kitchen and pretended not to notice that her husband was preparing for a meeting she knew nothing about on his day off. But my little sister Alice could not stay silent forever. She was only 6 years old, so she approached our dad and with childlike simplicity took his hand and asked where he was going again. Dad seemed almost shocked, but muttered something and rather sharply pulled his hand out of his little girl's palms and left the house. And Alice, who of course did not hear anything, burst into tears with resentment and grief. But even his youngest daughter's tears did not stop our dad. He left the house, got into his car, and drove away. Alice continued to cry, but for some reason our mother did not leave the kitchen. It was as if she was not there at all. Joseph left his room and froze in confusion, seemingly not understanding what was happening. But I really didn't understand anything. After all, I saw this strange scene with my own eyes, and I could not understand my mother. Why didn't she do anything about it? I spent all day with Alice to make sure she would not cry anymore. After this incident, Dad, or maybe I should call him Father, became even more distant from us. As his oldest daughter, I felt some responsibility for what was happening in our family. In order to somehow draw his attention to the situation, I went to the business center where my father worked. I did not warn him, I just simply waited for him in the parking lot. And then I suddenly discovered that I was not alone in this parking lot waiting for my father. There was a woman who wore large sunglasses. So I did not immediately realize that it was the heroine of the story that I had almost forgotten about. My father walked up to her, hugged her around the waist, and they kissed. I was hiding behind a column, but I saw everything. I was terribly angry, and then acted before I thought about what I was doing. I jumped out of my hiding spot and ran up to the sweet couple, pushed the woman away, and started yelling at my father. He was very surprised to see me, but quickly got himself together. My father grabbed my shoulders and shook me lightly. It worked in that I came to my senses. After making sure that my aggression was over, my father's mistress approached us, and I was finally able to take a closer look at her face. Now I recognized her even before my father told me her name. It was Frances. She was obviously older, but that unpleasant smile was still there. And then my father told me the truth. After I found his notes and asked him to tell me the story of their love, my father could not stop thinking about Frances even though so many years had passed. He decided to find her. It wasn't that difficult on the internet because Frances never got married and kept her maiden name. My father contacted her. It turned out that a couple of years ago, Frances had returned to the United States because her father had died and left her his house, so she just stayed there. He met with her, and again, they picked up where they left off, romantically. Looking ahead, I will say that I understand that 2 of my actions resulted in the collapse of my family. First, I pulled out the story with Frances, which after resurrecting it, my father found her and made her his mistress. And now, when, because of me, their relationship was no longer a secret, he decided that he did not need to hide anymore. He asked my mother for a divorce, left us, and now lives with Frances in her house. This is the end of my story. My father betrayed his family and me, and all because I did not curb my curiosity in time. Thank you for listening to me, and write in the comments what you think about this story.